Hello. In this week's Torah portion, Tisa, we learn about the unfortunate event of the golden calf. In the absence of Moses, the Israelites melt their golds and fashion it into an idol, going so far as to say, quote, "These are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt," unquote. It did not take long for the Jews to lapse into idolatry, and they would cling to it tenaciously and enthusiastically for the next 1,000 years. Let me describe this process, then present you with a historical mystery, and propose some ways to resolve it. So, with their first taste of freedom, the Jews rushed to worship the golden calf. Over and over again, they rebelled against God, and huge numbers worshipped idols for 1,000 years. The prophet's main job was to bring them back to the folds. Sometimes this idol worship was accompanied by child sacrifice and sacred prostitution. Even King Solomon, that wisest of kings, fell prey to it in his old age. The worst offender was King Menashe of Judah, the longest reigning Jewish monarch. In his 55-year reign, in the 7th century BCE, he practiced, sponsored, and encouraged idolatry on a large scale, built idolatrous shrines, turned the Holy Temple into a pagan site, killed many priests and prophets, including the prophet Isaiah, and outlawed the study of Torah. He repented before dying, but inflicted severe damage on the spirit of Israel. Why did he do it? The Talmud records an episode where King Menashe appears to Rav Ashi in a dream. Rav Ashi, one of the greatest luminaries of the Talmud, lived more than 1,000 years after King Menashe. The king engages the rabbi in a discussion of Jewish law and shows himself to be not only well-versed in Torah, but also superior to the rabbi. Rav Ashi asks him, "If you are so wise, why did you worship idols?" King Menashe replies, "If you had been there and lived in my time, you would have done the same. You would have lifted the hems of your robes to run behind me to worship idols also." Evidently, then, idolatry was a craving, an organic need, an addiction, an overwhelming desire. An analogy would be the sex drive. If God were to appear and tell us no more sex, people would continue to do it anyway. The urge for idolatry was that strong and could not be easily silenced. Everybody was doing it in those days, and society at large has a big impact on our behavior. If even wise kings can be enticed to worship idols, what about the rest of us? Now the mystery. After the first temple was destroyed, the Jews were exiled to Babylon. 7 years later, they were allowed to return to their lands and rebuild the temple. After their return, they lost all desire for idolatry. Idolatry disappeared from Judaism, suddenly and completely, and has remained absent for the next 2,500 years to this day. This is the mystery. Why did the Jews abandon idolatry cold turkey after the return from Babylon? Before we proceed, let me make something clear. Idolatry is the worship of living entities or inanimate objects in the belief that they have the power to grant benefits. This is all it means in the Jewish tradition. Now, some modern thinkers have expanded the definition of idolatry to include the love of money, the love of specific people, of a cause, or of a hobby, etc. One sometimes gets the feeling that anything you care one whit about, they call idolatry. So in that view, the only way to observe the commandment against idolatry is not to care at all about anything. That cannot be. So we will remain with the original definition of idolatry. The Talmud explains the mystery in a very colorful way. The Jews captured the demon responsible for idolatry and destroyed it. They were about to do the same for the demon responsible for sex, but didn't because sex is needed for procreation. Here's the story in the Talmud. Quote, "After the return from Babylonian captivity, the men of the great assembly said, 'Woe, woe, it is the evil desire for idolatry who has destroyed the sanctuary, burned the temple, killed all the righteous, driven all Israel into exile, and is still dancing around among us. You, God, have surely given him to us so that we may receive reward by resisting him. We do not want either him or the reward through him. So the evil desire for idolatry was surrendered to them. He came forth from the Holy of Holies like a young fiery lion. They said, "How shall we act with it? Perhaps, God forbid, heaven may have mercy on him." The prophet said to them, "Cast him into a pot made of leads and close its opening with leads, because lead absorbs the voice." They did so, and he died. They said, "Let us also pray for mercy for the evil inclination." They prayed for mercy, and he was also handed over to them. The prophet said to them, "Realize that if you kill him also, the world goes down." They imprisoned him for 3 days to see what would happen, then looked in the whole land of Israel for a fresh egg and could not find it. The evil inclination is responsible for sex, which is required for reproduction. They said, "What shall we do now? Shall we kill him? The world would then go down. Shall we beg for half mercy? Allow him to live but not tempt us?" They do not grant half measures in heaven. They put out his eyes and let him go. This helped inasmuch as he no longer entices men to commit incest. Unquote. The Midrash sums it up as follows. Quote, Rabbi Hunia said in the name of Rabbi Dosa Bartebet, God created 2 evil inclinations in his world, the inclination to idolatry and the inclination to sexual immorality. The inclination to idolatry has already been uprooted from the Jewish people. The inclination to sexual immorality, however, still exists. Unquote. Actually, there's more. After Babylon, the Jews did not just ignore idolatry. They were willing to die rather than be forced to worship idols. The Maccabean revolt, which we remember every year at Hanukkah time, is a perfect example. The Talmud's colorful explanation will not satisfy everybody. So let's speculate. Why did idolatry disappear among the Jews so suddenly and so completely? Some say that God made it happen. He foretold it through the prophet Jeremiah. As it says, "And these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to all the people who were carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, after 70 years," he got it right, "are fulfilled at Babylon, I will make you return to this place. Then you shall pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you shall seek me and find me, when you shall search for me with all your heart, and I will allow myself to be found by you, says the Lord, and I will restore you from your captivity." Unquote. The counterpoint is that a prophecy does not explain everything, because there is such a thing as free will. Another possibility is that, having experienced the destruction of the temple and the exile, the Jews realized that the prophets were right. If they worshipped any god but gods, they were doomed. This is a rational explanation, but reason is not what rules passions. Some will say this is just normal evolution. The rest of the world has also been slowly moving away from idolatry. Yes, but not as suddenly as the Jews did. Another possibility is that the experience of captivity in Babylon cured them of the desire for idolatry. But then we remember that slavery in Egypt did not. Where's the difference? Some will say they did not have the Torah in Egypt. Another possibility is that they wanted to assimilate in the world around them. The counterpoint is that the rest of the world, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, were still idolatrous. Sifrei Devarim says, quote, "If the names of all the idols in the world were listed, all the donkeys in the world would not suffice to carry them." Unquote. Many Jews indeed wanted to assimilate, but not by worshipping idols. Those who were Hellenized or Romanized loved the foreign cultures and the philosophy, but not the idolatry. One can argue that the Jews saw the bad effects of idolatry around them in Babylon. In fact, quite the opposite happened. Babylon prospered, and they prospered along with it. Most did not return to Judea when King Cyrus allowed them. Yet they did not turn to idolatry. They established Judaism in exile and wrote the authoritative Babylonian Talmud. I have an explanation, which I consider to be the most likely. During the 1,000 years of idolatry, the Jews were essentially free and masters of their own house. They felt they could indulge in whatever appealed to them, as free people do. Those who found idolatrous rites colorful and attractive felt free to indulge in them. But for the next 2,500 years, the Jews were subjugated or persecuted by the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Christians, the Muslims, etc. They felt they had to keep their own traditions and not adopt any of the customs of the hated overlords as an act of rebellion. They were even willing to die rather than be forced to indulge in idolatry or reject their traditions. A point in support of this theory is that now that most Jews are free, especially in the United States, and not constrained in their spiritual choices, many are abandoning Judaism. This leads one to ask the question, does anti-Semitism have a big role to play in preserving Judaism? I will leave you with this depressing question. Shabbat Shalom.